Hello, Argonauts! I'm Super Synapse, and I'll be your guide today to set up a validator for Argochain. By setting up this validator, you will be actively participating in consensus for transactions being submitted to the Argochain, and in return, earn AGC token rewards for participating in our proof of stake. In this video, we'll cover how to set up your validator on macOS, Windows, and Linux using physical hardware you own. But setting up a validator in the cloud is also an option that can be done in a similar process, and may be covered in a future video, so keep an eye out for that. This video has chapters, so you can easily skip around or come back as a reference from where you left off. Additionally, many useful links have been included in the video description, which I'll be referencing as we go along. The first of which is the Argochain Validator Guide, link number 1 in the video description. Before we begin the setup, let's cover a few best practices. The minimum specs for a validator are an 8-core CPU, 16 GB of RAM, 500 GB SSD, NVMe or equivalent, and a high-speed internet connection of 1 gigabit per second with low latency. You will also need a minimum of 20,001 AGC to stake. While the minimum specs are perfectly fine, if you're considering purchasing a Mini PC that will be more future-proof, better ensure you maintain consensus during peak loads, or potentially open up your options to run a second validator for another network at the same time. The recommended specs are a 16-core CPU, 32 GB of RAM, 1 TB SSD, NVMe or equivalent, and a 1 gigabit per second internet connection with low latency. It's also recommended to have 20,201 AGC as a little extra buffer for potential slashing. We'll cover that later in the video. Something else to note is that whatever computer you decide to use as a node, you will want to have it running 24/7. You can do this on a computer you use or have laying around collecting dust, but in most cases, having dedicated hardware is the best way to go. We're not affiliated in any way, but here's an example of what that can look like, and they do go on sale from time to time, and commonly come with Windows pre-installed. Links are provided as number 3 in the video description for ease of research. Not only will having a dedicated hardware like these examples allow you to leave it undisturbed at all times, but it can also be significantly more efficient. For example, my main computer tower consumes between 250 and 500 watts, and a dedicated node like the one pictured, which I personally own, clocks in at roughly 20 watts of power. At 10 cents per kilowatt, that's the difference between $17.50 per year and over $250 per year just in electricity. Something worth considering. A preventative measure to be aware of is a battery backup to keep your validator running in the event you have a power outage. While not required, I've personally found this to be very helpful, especially if power goes out while I'm away, potentially leading to several days or even weeks before I notice and get it back up and running. Alright, now that we've covered the hardware, let's start installing the software. Installing the Rust dependency is slightly different depending on your operating system, but once we have that completed, the rest of the setup will be the same. Installing an operating system is outside of the scope of this video, but if you don't have an operating system, a link to download Linux Ubuntu is included as link number 4 in the video description. Or consider the Mini PCs that commonly come with Windows pre-installed. During the setup process, if you run into any issues, join the Devolved AI Discord and go to the channel Argochain Validators for any questions or help. Link number 7 in the video description. Once we begin, it's important to do this part of the setup all in one go. It should take roughly 15 minutes, at which point you can walk away while it continues a longer part of the setup on its own in the background. I'll start with the Rust installation process on Linux, but if you're using Windows or Mac OS, you can skip to those chapters in the video now. Alright, Linux users! Our first step is to go to link number 1 in the video description, the Argochain Validator Guide. Then navigate to the tab Setting Up Your Development Environment on the sidebar and choose the Linux tab in the dropdown. Here, I'll copy the first line of code. Do note, by hovering over the right side of the code block, you have a copy button which you can click to copy and avoid making any mistakes. This is also important as we continue to ensure you copy the full code blocks, which can include multiple lines in the prompt. Once that's copied, let's open our terminal. You can find it in your applications or hotkey to it by holding Ctrl-Alt-T. Then, to paste the copied code into the terminal, you need to hold Ctrl-Shift-V and click Enter. For my computer, I need to enter my password to grant permission. For those new to using the terminal, we'll let it perform some actions, in this case, updating our package lists, and we're waiting for the terminal prompt line to reappear. In my instance, SuperSynapse at node 2 written in green. When you see this, go back to the validator guide and copy the second field of code to install the required packages, and paste it into your terminal. When that's done, copy and paste the next line to install Rust, and then when prompted, click 1 and hit Enter for the default installation. Scrolling down, we'll start the next series of code blocks. The first one updates the package manager, and the second one will tell us our version of Rust. So once you paste in rust-version, check that you get a version number to confirm it has installed. If you get a not found error, this means you haven't installed Rust and need to repeat the earlier processes. The next block of code will set and update our Rust version. Then we'll add nightly toolchain and WebAssembly, and again verify the configuration, making sure we see a version and not an error message. Moving down to the header Compile a Substrate node, let's copy the next line, and it may take about a minute to update. When it's finished, copy and paste the last line of code to compile our node template. This last step will take some time to perform, and I'll speed it up for the sake of the video, but in my instance, I experienced between 13 minutes and an hour. So while it's doing this update, now is a great time to grab a snack, walk the dog, or check your emails. But when it's finished, we'll be done with the Linux portion of this setup, and we can skip over the Mac and Windows setup to rejoin everyone else at the chapter Update Boot Nodes. See you there! All right, Windows users! Our first step is to go to link number 1 in the video description, the Argochain Validator Guide. Then navigate to the Setting Up Your Development Environment tab in the sidebar, making sure to then click on the Windows tab in the dropdown. Here, I'll copy the first line of code. Do note, by hovering over the right side of the code block, you have a copy button which you can click to copy and avoid making any mistakes. This is also important as we continue to ensure you copy the full code blocks, which can include multiple lines in the prompt. Once that's copied, let's open up our command prompt. You can either find it in your applications or by typing command prompt in the search field on the taskbar. Once that opens, I'll paste in our line of code to install WSL and click Enter. Keep an eye out for a firewall pop-up similar to the one shown to allow the installation to start. Once the loading bar is finished, you may get a second pop-up, and we'll allow that as well. When it's finished and we see our prompt line reappear, we can see the message above that we need to restart our computer to continue the setup. We don't need to look up other Linux distributions, so I'll skip that line and restart my computer now. Once you've rebooted Windows, you should see a WSL window for Ubuntu saying it's installing. Give this a few minutes. It may not appear it's doing anything, but it is working in the background. When it's done, you'll see a prompt to enter a Unix username. You can choose anything you'd like. In my case, I'll type in super and hit enter. Then it will prompt for a password. I'll choose a password and hit enter. And retype it a second time to confirm. It's a good idea to write down both your username and password for this login in case you need to make any changes in the future. Once it's done with the last part of its setup, we can see a green command prompt for our computer appear. At this point, let's go back to the validator guide, setting up your development environment for Windows, and scroll down to step 2 on the page. I'll copy the first line of code for this step and paste it into our Ubuntu terminal and hit enter. Do note, to paste into this terminal, you will need to right-click on the terminal and it will paste in. Ctrl-V will not work. Once it's finished, our package list with a series of done messages and our green command prompts reappears. We're now ready to copy the next line of code to install the required packages. When that's done, we'll start the Rust installation. And type 1 and enter to continue with the default installation. Next, we'll update our shell and verify Rust has installed properly by querying the version number. Take a quick look, and if you see a version number, you'll know you've done the previous steps correctly. If you get an error or not found message, you'll know Rust did not install, and you'll need to start over from the beginning of step 2. Ours installed correctly, so we'll set and update Rust with the next line of code. And since this is 2 lines of code, once it finishes, hit enter again to run the second line. And we'll do the same thing for the nightly toolchain and WebAssembly block. And hit enter a second time. Now we're ready to verify the configuration by requesting version numbers. When you hit enter, we should see another series of logs on what we installed. Looks good! We have information for both prompts and are ready to continue. Now we are setting up the repository for our node. We'll let that run, and the second line in that code block will take us to the directory we want to compile our node template, denoted in blue. And hit enter a second time. I'll copy the last line of code, paste, and hit enter, and it will continue the setup. This last step will take some time to perform, and I'll speed it up for the sake of the video, but expect it to be between 13 minutes and an hour. So while it's doing this update, now's a great time to grab a snack, walk the dog, or check your emails while you wait. But when it's finished, we'll be done with the Windows portion of this setup, and we can skip over the Mac setup to rejoin everyone else at the chapter Update Boot Nodes. See you there! All right, Mac users! Our first step is to go to the link number 1 in the video description, the Argochain Validator Guide. Then navigate to Setting Up Your Development Environment in the sidebar, making sure to then click the macOS tab in the dropdown. Here, I'll copy the first line of code for installing Homebrew. Do note, by hovering over the right side of the code block, you have a copy button which you can click to copy and avoid making any mistakes. This is also important as we continue to ensure you copy the full code blocks, which can include multiple lines in the prompt. And open up a terminal, which you can bring up by hitting the hotkeys Option Space and typing in terminal. With our terminal up, paste the code we copied earlier. If prompted, enter your system password to allow the installation, and click Enter again to continue. Once that's done, let's verify it installed correctly by checking the version. Fantastic! We can see my Homebrew version here. If we were to get an error or not found message, we'd know that Homebrew was not installed correctly. Next, let's make sure we have the most up-to-date version, pasting in the brew update. And then install Protobuf. And now we'll install Rust, making sure to proceed with the default installation by typing 1 and hitting Enter when prompted. Then update the shell to include cargo. Just like before, let's check to make sure Rust installed correctly by checking the version. And it did. We're good to configure and update Rust. Then, we'll add the nightly toolchain and WebAssembly targets, and again verify it installed correctly. Great! We can see information about our toolchains and versions. At this point, we're good to set up our node in the next section, Compile a Substrate node. When it's done, you'll notice it added Argochain into our prompt for the next step of compiling the node template. I'll copy the last line of code and paste it in, and it will continue the setup from here. This last step will take some time to perform, and I'll speed it up for the sake of the video, but expect it to be between 13 minutes and an hour. So while you're doing this update, now's a great time to grab a snack, walk the dog, or check your emails while you wait. But when it's finished, we'll be done with the macOS portion of this setup, and we can rejoin with everyone else at the next chapter, Update Boot Nodes. Welcome back! At this point, the process is the same for all operating systems, now that Rust is installed and configured. Let's navigate to the tab Update Boot Nodes and copy and enter the first line of code to make a script executable. Also note that we are picking up where we left off with the /Argochain directory listed in blue next to our command prompt in green. It will look slightly different in Windows and Mac, but if you don't see this, type in cd space Argochain to add this directory for the steps before pasting in the next line. Once that's entered, we're ready to execute the script. Okay, there's some details about how it updated in the minor v raw JSON file, but we're ready to go to the next tab, Generate Your Node Keys. Do note that the top prompt is for Ubuntu and Windows, and the lower prompt is for Mac OS. Let's enter that, and your system password if requested, and update. Then we'll scroll down to make another script executable, and run the script to rotate our keys. And if prompted, enter in your system password. Here, we're prompted to enter a path. Although you can choose a custom path, I'll stick with the recommended example by highlighting it and right-clicking to copy. And I'll do the same with the recommended chain-specific file, minor va raw.json. Okay, and now for the fun part. We get to choose a name for our node. You can enter anything, but I'll call mine SuperSynapse Node 1. And at this point, you'll see an endless updating series of logs. This is your validator watching the Argochain live, but it isn't participating in validation just yet. I'll navigate to the next tab in the guide, Run Validator Node. And we'll enter in the first line to initiate our Argochain node as a validator and allow it to run in the background if we were to close the terminal. If you ever want to stop this live view of logs, you can press Ctrl+C in the terminal to allow us to enter a prompt. It will also stop displaying the logs we were viewing earlier. If you want them to display again, you can do so by pasting in the next line, tail-f nohup.out. If we close the terminal, we can likewise again display the logs by pasting in this second prompt. And if we ever need to shut down or restart our node, we can again open up our terminal and run the first line to start our validator and the second line to display the logs. We're ready to get our tokens onto the Argochain. Argochain currently uses a hybrid approach to the wallet interface, meaning you'll need a browser extension wallet as well as an ArgoWallet account. For this tutorial, I'll be using the Polkadot JS wallet. Links to this, as well as other compatible wallets like Talisman and Subwallet, as well as the ArgoWallet, are included as number 2 in the video description. At this point, we'll want to make a new seed phrase for our wallet. Here you have two options. You can make a seed phrase in your browser wallet extension and import it into the ArgoWallet to bridge, or, as I'll be doing, you can create a seed phrase in the ArgoWallet app and import it into your browser wallet. I'll start by going to the ArgoWallet app and create New Wallet. I'm presented with a seed phrase. As always, make sure to store your seed phrase in a safe place and triple check you've copied it down correctly. If at any time you decide you want a different seed phrase, you can refresh the page and start the process again. It does not save until you finish the setup. Next, I'll check the I have kept it somewhere safe box and continue. Then I'll create an account with a username or email and password. And now I have an ArgoWallet. Re-enter your login information to open the wallet, and we can now see our balance of 0 AGC. Next, I'll go to polkadot.js, install the extension for my browser, and pin it for ease of reference later. In Polkadot.js, I'll import my seed phrase, name my wallet, and create a password. And now we're ready to bridge. Going back to the ArgoWallet app, we can click on the Bridge tab. And in my case, I needed to refresh the page. I'm automatically prompted by my EVM wallet on Polygon to connect. A quick note, some wallets that choose the network for you may have issues. we recommend MetaMask as the wallet of choice to bridge from Polygon to Argochain. If you still want to use a wallet other than MetaMask, make sure to change over to the Polygon network first to connect. And if you still run into issues, import or transfer your AGC to a MetaMask wallet to continue this process. Now that I'm connected, I'll enter the amount of AGC I want to bridge. As discussed earlier, the least you can do for a validator is 20,001, but I'm going to stick with the recommended amount of 20,201. I'll approve the tokens on Polygon and sign the transaction. And then send the tokens to Argochain with a second transaction. From here, if I go to the Home tab, I should be able to see my balance on Argochain. This should happen in about 10 seconds, but if you don't see your balance quickly, give it another minute and refresh the homepage of the wallet app. Now, let's stake our AGC. I'll navigate to the staking.argoscan.net, link number 5 in the video description. Upon opening this page, I'm prompted to connect my Polkadot wallet. I'll choose my AGC wallet and connect. From here, I'll navigate to the staking tab at the top and select my wallet and enter the amount I want to stake. I'm going to choose the 20,000 as the required minimum, with an extra 200 for any potential slashing, leaving roughly 1 AGC in my wallet for future transactions. And then I'll follow the steps to submit the transaction. At the top of the page, I see a green check mark to show the transaction went through. The next step may take a minute to populate, but I'll navigate to the Nominate button at the top and click on the Session Key button. Here we'll need to connect our wallet to our validator. Going back to the validation guide, I'll copy the first line of code and hit Ctrl+C to input the prompt. Then it will spit out a session key. Do note, this session key is somewhat sensitive, so don't go around sharing it publicly, as it could allow someone to spoof your node and potentially incur slashing. I'll highlight and right-click to copy this session key, making sure to start at the 0x after the quotation marks and ending just before the quotation marks before the ID number. And paste that in as my session key. Then I'll click Sign and Submit and sign the transaction in my wallet. You should notice that the session key button has now updated to say Validate. I'll click on that and go through the process of signing a transaction from my node to start validating. And now we can see it's running with a stop button if I want to stop my validator at a later point. If at this point you want to see your logs again, as I prefer to, you can go back to the Run Validator Node tab in the Validator Guide and paste in the second prompt to start them up again. At this point, let's navigate to explorer.argoscan.net, link number 6 in the video description. Navigating to the Accounts tab, we can see our total balance, our transferable balance, and our locked and bonded balances. Next, I'll navigate to the Settings tab and use this opportunity to update the metadata in my wallet. Updating this metadata is similar to how you would add a new network to display chain data in MetaMask. Navigating to the Network tab and staking in the dropdown, we can see all the validators on the chain. In order for our validator to appear on this list, we need a full epoch after the one we submitted our session key in to end. At this point, our validator will be included in proposing and validating blocks. I'll leave this run overnight, and I'll see you when I get back. Hello again, it's been over 12 hours, and if I navigate back from the accounts page to the staking page, we can now see my validator listed. Additionally, if I click on the drop-down and historic results, I can see data about my node and its participation. If I go to the payouts in the lower tabs, I can now claim my rewards. After a few seconds, if I go back to my ArgoWallet and refresh the page if necessary, I can see my balance has updated. Let's go! If you ever decide you want to stop validating, in the Argoscan Explorer, you can navigate to the Network tab and Staking in the dropdown, and then Accounts in the lower tabs. Then going to the three dots beside our listed wallet and Unbond Funds. At this point, we can prompt a transaction which will begin the process of unbonding our staked AGC. Do note, this will take 28 days from submitting the unbonding transaction before you will be able to withdraw. Before we end this video, it's important to cover the responsibility that comes with providing a validator node, which is the topic of slashing. Take a minute and read through this page in the validator guide. In short, as long as you aren't trying to do anything nefarious, you have very little to worry about. But if you do try something, you will incur significant slashing. The primary concern for most nodes is occasional unresponsiveness, which is why it's important to have the preventative measures like a battery backup for power loss and checking in on your node from time to make sure it's continuing to participate. It's also a good idea to stay in touch with the Devolved AI Twitter, Discord, or Telegram to keep track of announcements and what's going on. And that's it. Thank you for participating in Argochain's consensus as a validator. We're glad to have you and are excited for what's to come. Until next time, Super Synapse signing out.